For 30 years, Johnny Carson wasn't just hosting a talk show. He was operating the most sophisticated power machine in American television, and most of the country had no idea. While families settled into their couches each night, trusting that familiar smile and easy laugh, Carson was quietly making decisions that could launch careers into orbit or freeze them out forever. The man who seemed so relaxed on camera ran an operation so tightly controlled that even the coffee cups on his desk were strategic choices. What you're about to discover isn't gossip or tabloid drama. These are verified accounts from producers, insiders, and people who lived inside Carson's world. And they paint a picture of late-night television that's far more calculated than anyone watching at home could have imagined. The question isn't whether Johnny Carson was talented. He absolutely was. The question is, should one person have wielded that much power over who America heard from and who got silenced? By the time you finish reading this, you'll see The Tonight Show completely differently. These weren't just backstage quirks or funny anecdotes to share at Hollywood parties. These were systematic choices that shaped an entire industry, influenced what Americans laughed at, and determined which voices would rise and which would vanish into obscurity. Carson understood something fundamental about television that most hosts never grasped. Controlling the room meant controlling the culture. The ban list was real, even if it never appeared on official NBC paperwork. According to longtime producer Peter Lassally, who confirmed details to author Mark Malkoff, there was absolutely a working system of people who would not be invited back, and it operated with ruthless efficiency precisely because it avoided drama. No public confrontations, no press releases, just a slow, quiet fade where publicists would call and suddenly the schedule was full, the timing wasn't right, or Johnny had other plans. What made this system particularly revealing was that banned guests would sometimes appear when guest hosts took over, which proved the decision wasn't coming from the network. It was coming from Carson himself. Sources connected to the show describe more than 30 names floating in various accounts of this shadow list, and whether it lived on paper or just in the minds of producers, it functioned the same way. One person controlled access to the most important platform in entertainment, and if you landed on the wrong side of his memory, you didn't get a second chance. The brilliance of the system was its deniability. Nobody could point to a document. Nobody could file a complaint. It was just understood within the industry that certain doors had closed, and they weren't opening again. This created an atmosphere where guests, especially newer ones, approached the show with a mixture of excitement and genuine fear. You weren't just performing, you were auditioning for the rest of your career. Even future successors weren't safe from Carson's cold shoulder. Jay Leno, who would eventually inherit The Tonight Show, found himself frozen out after being a regular guest and rising comedy favorite. Producer Peter Lassally described how Carson decided Leno's material wasn't landing anymore. And once Johnny made that determination, the switch rarely flipped back. Imagine being a comedian in that era, watching the biggest stage in America quietly stop returning your calls while the entire industry noticed. Clubs noticed. Agents noticed. Audiences felt something had changed without understanding why. The uncomfortable question lingers, was it really about bad sets, or did Carson sense future competition before anyone said it aloud? When one person can freeze out a comic with a single decision, the power dynamics of late night become uncomfortably clear. Leno had to keep grinding, performing in smaller venues, rebuilding momentum that had been abruptly cut off. The fact that he eventually succeeded despite Carson's coldness speaks to his persistence, but it also highlights how precarious success was when it depended on one man's approval. Other comedians watched what happened to Leno and learned a harsh lesson. Don't get too comfortable. Don't assume you're safe, and never, ever assume the relationship will last. A single awkward segment could haunt your career forever. The Tonight Show wasn't a small podcast that disappears into the scroll. It was the biggest late-night platform in America, and the rhythm had to stay smooth. If a guest rambled, got boring, or disrupted the flow, Carson would cut it short, sometimes using a commercial break as an escape hatch while producers rushed in to reset the damage. It didn't matter how famous you were. Even Orson Welles noted how staff reacted when Carson simply popped into a dressing room, because Johnny wasn't built for cozy backstage bonding. It was business, timing, and control. Add embarrassment to the mix, and you had a recipe for permanent exile. If you made the host look foolish or out of control, that wasn't a cute story for later. It was a quiet goodbye. The show operated on an unspoken contract. You could be interesting, you could be funny, you could even be controversial, but you could never make Johnny look bad. The moment you violated that rule, whether intentionally or accidentally, you had broken something that couldn't be repaired. Guests who understood this navigated the show like diplomats, carefully balancing entertainment value with the need to keep Carson comfortable and in control. Those who didn't understand it often had very short careers in late-night television. What looked spontaneous on camera was actually carefully engineered behind the scenes. Carson hated surprises, so the show built an entire system to make natural conversation feel safe. Former Tonight Show assistant Barbara Meltzer explained that Carson wanted guests comfortable and usually knew what they'd discuss ahead of time. Talent coordinators spoke with guests and mapped out conversations so Johnny could appear relaxed without walking into chaos. The natural moment was often a controlled moment, not scripted word for word, but guided with bullet points instead of full scripts, loose enough to feel alive, tight enough to protect the host. When you watch old clips and admire Johnny's quick wit, consider how much of that quickness came from preparation nobody mentioned on camera. If the guest knew the lanes and Johnny knew the turns, was it still spontaneous, or just brilliant engineering? This pre-interview process was extensive. Coordinators would spend hours with guests, mining their stories, testing which anecdotes got the best reactions, and structuring the conversation to give Carson multiple exit points if something wasn't working. The host could then steer toward topics that had been vetted or away from areas that felt risky. This created the illusion of effortless conversation while actually requiring enormous behind-the-scenes labor. It also meant that guests who thought they were having a genuine moment with Johnny were often just following a script they hadn't been told existed. Carson kept 4 identical coffee cups ready, so his desk always looked the same from show to show. Not similar, not close enough identical. Same shape, same look, same quiet signal to his brain that the world was in order. Living inside a live broadcast machine where one weird guest or missed cue could become tomorrow's headline, Carson built little islands of certainty, and the cup was one of them. It's a small ritual that told him this was his space, his rhythm. When your big moment happens 5 nights a week on national television for decades, you want your desk to stay exactly the same. Those 4 cups weren't about vanity. They were about maintaining psychological control when everything else was unpredictable. Think about the level of attention to detail required to maintain 4 identical cups across years of broadcasting. Someone had to source them, protect them, ensure they were always available. It seems trivial until you realize it represents Carson's entire philosophy: control the controllable, eliminate variables, create consistency in a business built on chaos. Other hosts might have laughed at such precision, but Carson understood that confidence comes from preparation, and preparation includes making sure nothing on your desk can surprise you. The desk itself wasn't furniture, it was a weapon. It kept Johnny centered, higher, and visually in charge even when a guest was the bigger celebrity that week. Audiences didn't need to be told who owned the room. Their eyes got the message instantly. When Johnny broke that rule by bringing a comedian from the desk to the couch, it meant something significant and unspoken promotion that only happened when he was genuinely impressed. The desk gave him control over timing. He could tap it, lean back, shuffle cards, or let a beat hang without looking lost. There's a famous story of Don Rickles damaging a cigarette box on Carson's desk, and Johnny turned it into a moment the next night, as if the desk itself had been disrespected. That invisible line was felt the second guest sat down. The physical distance also created a psychological hierarchy. Guests on the couch were lower, sitting in softer furniture that made them sink slightly, while Carson remained elevated, backlit, in command. Camera angles reinforced this dynamic, often shooting guests from slightly above while giving Carson straight-on hero shots. Everything about the set design served his authority, and guests who understood this adjusted their energy accordingly. Those who didn't often seemed uncomfortable without knowing why. Carson nearly walked away from NBC around 1979, and that negotiation reveals who really held power. He wasn't just talent anymore, he was the franchise. NBC wasn't hiring Johnny Carson, they were renting him. When Carson grew tired and protective of his image, the unthinkable became possible. He could actually leave. Imagine being an NBC executive realizing the face of your night schedule might vanish. What happens to the audience, to affiliates, to all the money, following him like a shadow? Carson's leverage was brutal in its simplicity. You can't replace a habit. People didn't watch a show, they watched Johnny. When the dust settled, he was earning $25 million a year while working 1 hour a night, 3 nights a week, for 37 weeks a year. That wasn't a deal, it was a coronation. When a network realizes one person can bend the schedule, who really has the power? This negotiation changed television forever, because it established that the right host, with the right audience loyalty, could dictate terms that seemed impossible. Carson reduced his workload while increasing his compensation, proving that scarcity creates value. By appearing less frequently, he became more valuable, not less. Network executives learned a painful lesson. Build your business around one irreplaceable person, and that person owns you. Behind the desk, Carson was building an empire that could outlive the applause. By 1980, he wasn't just the host. He had his own production operation shaping what got made, how it got sold, and who got paid, including distribution deals tied to The Tonight Show itself. Ownership became the ultimate punchline. When you control the machine, you don't beg, you negotiate. He could protect his image, decide what footage lived on, and keep his legacy from being chopped into random clips without permission. The company controlling licensing rights to The Tonight Show archive was literally part of the Carson Empire story. How many television hosts were thinking like studio bosses at the same time? If Carson could choose what the public sees and when they see it, that's not just entertainment, it's strategy. This production company gave Carson leverage beyond his on-camera role. He was producing other shows, developing talent, and creating revenue streams that didn't depend on him sitting at that desk every night. This business acumen separated him from hosts who were simply performers. Carson understood that real power in Hollywood comes from ownership, not salary, and he structured his deals accordingly. When other hosts complained about their treatment, Carson was already playing a different game entirely. Power brought danger that stayed outside the Hollywood gates. According to Henry Bushkin's memoir, there was a shadowy chapter involving concerns about organized crime attention drifting too close. America watched Johnny crack jokes every night, but behind the scenes, the worry wasn't about whether the monologue would work, it was about who was listening and what they wanted. Bushkin describes this less like a dramatic movie scene and more like a slow leak in the walls, a sense that being famous enough meant somebody would eventually try to invoice you for your own safety. The mob angle represents quiet pressure, the kind that makes a powerful person change routines, look over shoulders, and realize the spotlight isn't always friendly. This wasn't paranoia, it was the reality of being wealthy and visible in an era when organized crime still had significant influence in entertainment. Carson had to consider security in ways that the audience never saw, adding another layer of stress to an already demanding job. The fact that he continued performing while managing these concerns speaks to his professionalism, but it also explains some of his need for control. When you're worried about external threats, controlling your immediate environment becomes even more critical. One of Bushkin's earliest jobs for Carson involved helping him break into a Manhattan apartment in 1970 to gather evidence of his wife's infidelity. This wasn't a joke or sketch premise, it was a real, messy private panic spilling into real decisions. If you can host America's bedtime routine with a grin but still feel desperate enough to do that off camera, what does control even mean at that level? This wasn't just tabloid drama, it was a personality blueprint. Carson's brand was cool precision, the calm voice, the perfect pause, the timing that made a room obey. But moments like this suggest that when the lights went off, control could crack. Once a person learns they can't control their own home life, they often try to control everything else: the show, the staff, the guests, the narrative. This incident reveals the man behind the mask, someone whose personal life was chaotic enough to drive him to desperate measures. The contrast between the composed host and the panicked husband shows how much energy Carson expended maintaining his public image. It also suggests that his professional control might have been compensation for personal chaos, a way to create order in at least one part of his life. On camera, Carson could feel like your smartest uncle, but the warmth was often engineered, not shared. He kept the emotional door half closed, charming and gentle, yet leaving people feeling like they never fully met him. Carson treated intimacy like a live wire. Too much feeling, and the whole Tonight Show rhythm could short out. He used safer tools, jokes, timing, quick pivots, playful teasing, then right back to control. The audience got comfort, the guests got the spotlight, but Carson kept private parts private, like hosting with one hand on the steering wheel at all times. He could make a guest laugh hard, but almost never let the moment turn into real confession. That distance didn't just protect him from strangers, it changed how he dealt with rivals, too. People who worked with Carson for years reported feeling like they never really knew him, that he remained fundamentally unknowable, even in close proximity. This emotional reserve was both his strength and his limitation. It protected him from being hurt or exposed, but it also isolated him, creating a loneliness that fame only amplified. Johnny didn't just guard the desk, he guarded his territory, including from other legends. His feuds were less about hatred and more about friction, different eras, different egos, different ideas of what funny should look like at 11:30. Bob Hope was a giant, a brand, a whole industry by himself. And when giants share a spotlight, even a polite joke can feel like a shove. The tension wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was scripted smiles with unscripted stiffness underneath. On The Tonight Show, the real battle was often over control of the moment, not the laugh. When Bob Hope appeared, there was always an undercurrent of competition. Two men from different comedy generations trying to prove their relevance. Carson represented the new era of conversational, observational humor, while Hope embodied old-school showmanship and scripted bits. Their interactions were professional but rarely warm, and audiences could sense the tension even if they couldn't name it. These moments revealed that Carson's graciousness had limits, especially when someone challenged his authority on his own stage. The couch was where real power showed up. A stand-up set could be great and still disappear into the night. But if Carson waved you over to sit down, your career suddenly got stamped with approval. In Carson's peak era, the show pulled in around 17 million viewers on a regular night. That tiny gesture, sit down, could mean you were no longer just a comedian. You were a name. The room changed when Carson decided someone was worth keeping close. Comedians like Jerry Seinfeld, Jay Leno before the freeze-out, David Letterman, and countless others owe significant career momentum to that couch invitation. It meant Carson saw potential beyond the 5-minute set. It meant he thought you could carry a conversation, handle the spotlight, and represent the kind of comedy he valued. For young comedians, getting that wave was the moment everything changed. Bookers at clubs would call. Agents would suddenly return messages. The industry took you seriously because Johnny did. And the reverse was equally powerful. If you did your set and didn't get invited over, everyone noticed that too. When Carson stepped down, he didn't hand the crown to someone and bless the future. He walked away and left a vacuum. Carson refused to publicly pick a successor, and that choice helped trigger the late-night landscape we recognize now. Then he did something colder and rarer. He went quiet. A few cameos here and there, occasional jokes sent to others, but no big return, no commentary, no criticism of what came after. He sailed, learned random things, and guarded distance like it was part of the brand. The message was subtle but loud. The show was over, and he wasn't going to watch someone else try to be him. His refusal to engage with late night after retirement was so complete that it seemed almost spiteful, as if he wanted to make sure nobody could claim his endorsement or benefit from association with him. This created enormous pressure on his successors, who had to establish themselves without any blessing from the man whose shadow still loomed over everything they did. After 30 years on America's 11:30 throne, Johnny Carson didn't transition, he simply left. In a business where everybody fights to stay seen, disappearing can be the loudest move you make. If you stay around, people get used to you. If you comment on replacements, you become a headline. If you chase attention, you shrink into a regular celebrity. Carson refused all of that. After retiring in 1992, he gave only one real post-retirement interview and then went back behind the curtain. He was protecting something, the myth, the mystery, or his own piece. A few cameos, a joke to Letterman occasionally, some quiet humor writing, then back to private life. sealing a vault and walking away with the key. This final act of control might have been his most brilliant. By disappearing, Carson ensured that his legacy remained frozen at its peak. There were no sad comeback attempts, no embarrassing appearances on reality shows, no desperate grabs for relevance. He existed in public memory exactly as he wanted, forever young, forever in command, forever the king of late night. All 15 secrets point to one pattern: control. Control of the couch, the room, who got welcomed back, who got frozen out. Late night wasn't just jokes, it was a gate, and Carson held the only key that mattered.